What's up, everybody? Hope y'all are doing good. So y'all, today's video is going to be different. I get a lot of comments, remarks, questions about my accent. People seem to be very interested in where I'm from and, you know, how I grew up, because I grew up in an area, I guess, that is known for being like very conservative and backwoodsy, and you know, in like movies and stuff, they're portrayed as being just like hillbillies. And you know, it's not fully accurate, but at the same time, it's not fully wrong either, because there are people like that do exist there. You know, it's mainly the older generation, but I have plenty of them in my family. I know plenty of other people like in my community that are like that. So they're characters, that's for sure. They're good people. Growing up around them, you know, that's all I ever knew. And so to me, that was just normal. But as I started to get out into the world and moved out, you know, I moved out to the Midwest for a while. And it was a completely different world, because I lived in the middle of a large city. I went from a little small mountain town to the big city. So it was very much a culture shock. And the first thing that people noticed about me was always my accent and the way certain words that I said, the way I said them. And really just, you know, they could tell that I was not from there. And I was being asked all the time, y'all, where are you from? Where are you from? And people would often guess either Tennessee or West Virginia, because they could pick up on, I guess, the real thick Appalachian accent. And so, you know, it's very much there. I never really knew I even had an accent until I left. But hearing myself over recordings and stuff, it's you know, sometimes it's so embarrassing. But so I try not to watch my own videos, really. I try not to listen to myself, because I do wonder if I sound stupid. And I'm sure there are people out there that are going to say I sound stupid. I mean, and I know that. You know, I've had that. Being on the internet and being like a public figure and stuff, you're gonna get stuff like that, and it does not bother me, because, you know, I know it's probably not music to everyone's ears, and some people, it may make their ears bleed, and that's understandable. So, but guys, today I'm gonna give y'all a list of words, just like a vocabulary test of some of the words that I grew up saying, things that my family, you know, what they still say, things kind of just more of what you would hear, I guess, on a daily basis. You know, and some of these words y'all might know, some of them you may not, some of them you may know and just pronounce differently. You know, so just kind of listen to them, and, you know, see what you think about them, see if, you know, kind of recall if you've heard them, and, you know, just leave in the comments some of the ones that you know and some of the ones you don't know. And so, y'all, these words are Appalachian words. I grew up, you know, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of South Carolina, not far from the North Carolina line. So, you know, it's a very secluded area, and we have our own language. Yes, we are in the South. You know, South Carolina is considered the deep South. But the people in Appalachia, they have their own culture and their own way of doing things, and they have a different accent than the rest of the South. You know, we don't really have, you know, we do a little bit. Those, you know, making your words very, very long, and I don't know, it's just like when you go to the coast of South Carolina, they have a different accent, and the rest of the South is different too. So some of these words are very unusual to people, and, you know, they're pretty unique. But okay, y'all, I'm gonna get to the very first word. Some of y'all may know this one, but something, my dad says this all the time, and the word is yonder. Everything is over yonder. You know, they don't really say over there, over that way. It's always over yonder. That's what I heard my whole life. That's what I still say. I don't say it as much as I used to, because I don't live there anymore. So I've kind of caught on to saying new things since I'm around different people, because I don't live in the mountains no more. I still visit regularly, but, you know, that is one common word, especially a lot of the older folks. So, and I'm gonna try to get through this pretty quick, y'all. I'm not gonna make this a super long video. Okay, y'all, and the second word is, I say this all the time, but that is breeches, and that is just another word for pants, especially blue jeans. I've heard, you know, khaki pants, dress pants, you know, I've heard them called breeches, but it's mainly leans towards blue jeans. We do say pants, but not really. I mean, it's kind of uncommon here. Okay, and the third word, y'all, is absolutely, it's always been my favorite word, and I used to say this all the time growing up. My mama, she says this, and the word is kyarn, K-Y-A-R-N. And that word basically is a word for something that stinks. Like, I remember one time Mama went outside on the porch. We were just sitting out there, and I was a kid, and I don't remember what the smell was because I was young, but I remember she would say, you know, oh God, something smells like yarn out here. And so, you know, I grew up hearing that. And when I moved away and I told people about that word, they thought that was the weirdest thing they've ever heard. They didn't even believe that was a word, but you know, it is. It's something, and it's something that we use all the time. Okay, and the next, y'all, I have 10 of these. So this is number 4. Okay, number 4, the word is cat head. And that is just what we use for something that is kind of large and tacky and something that's really just out of place and doesn't look right. And we also use it, it's also the name of like a really big biscuit that we make. These biscuits are very big around, and they're called cat head biscuits. So cat head is just a word for something that is tacky, something out of place. Just something basically, it doesn't look good. That's just what we've always called it. Okay, and number 5, y'all, is a polecat, and that is what we call a skunk. Growing up, that is all I ever heard them called. I knew they were called a skunk, you know, just I guess from like being in school and stuff, and you know, being educated that way. But my family always said polecat, and that's just what I always refer to and what I've always called them. Like, you know, when I'm driving and stuff, I drive a lot from a job, so you know, there's always dead skunks and stuff in the road, and you know, they have that awful smell. And every time I smell it, the first thing that comes to my mind is, you know, oh, I smell a polecat, and people had no idea what that was outside of the mountains. So that to them was very, very unusual, but you know, to me, it's normal. Okay, number 6 is the word holler. And you know, that can be two things. You know, just basically yelling real loud, they call it hollering. But the way that I'm talking about it is, it's the word for like a little valley in the mountains. The word is actually hollow, but with a lot of words that end in OW, they change it to ER. So, you know, like people live in these hollers and stuff in the mountains, which means they live like in a little dip in a little valley between the mountains, and it's kind of flat through there, and that's where they do their farmland. But everybody in the mountains knows what a holler is. People outside, probably not so much. Okay, and the 7th word, y'all, is branch. And this is not like a branch on a tree. This is what we call like a stream or a creek. The way my grandmother pronounces it branch, and I used to love to hear her say that. But that's just what we call, and also we call that like a little spring and stuff. I just remember as a kid going out and playing in the branch at my cousin's house. That's what we called it. But basically, it's just a little creek, just something runs through your yard, just a little tiny one. And number 8 is painter, and this is not somebody that paints, although I do painting for my job all the time. But this is not what that means. A painter is the word for a panther mountain lion, because in the mountains there's always these legends and tales, and people believe, and I have seen it with my own eyes. I know they exist, but apparently scientifically they say they don't. But we have black panthers, and you know, it's just a huge black cat. And I remember here, and they're called painters. And I just remember as a kid, you know, hearing the stories about them. My grandma said, you know, when one's around, because they scream like a woman. That's what they sound like. Although I've never heard that before, the screaming. I have seen them with my own eyes. We were driving at night, leaving. It was actually my cousin's, her beauty pageant at school. And we were on the way home, and we were kind of out in the country a little bit. We wasn't far out of town. And we were driving down the road, and there's this big old red barn, and on the side of the road there was a big one and a smaller one with it. So I'm guessing that was his baby. And I have never ever forgotten that. But its eyes were huge. I mean, it was just giant cat eyes. It was a little bigger than like a black lab would be, but it's also very long and a lot more thinner, and it had a long tail, and that was the coolest thing ever. I was obsessed with that after I saw that and did like so much history and research. But that's just what we call them, because I remember when we saw that, I was telling my cousins like, oh, we saw a painter, and you know, of course they didn't believe me, but that's just a funny word that we use. We have a bunch of weird words, y'all, for animals. Okay, and number 9, this word is reckon. And what that means is, like, people say, yeah, I reckon, which means like, yes, I assume. That's just a replacement word we use for that. And I'm not sure if that's even a real word, like in the dictionary. You know, a lot of these are not, I'm sure. And I actually have heard people outside of the mountains say this, like in other parts of the South. I didn't hear this in the Midwest. So this is, one that people, they might know, they might not know. But it just basically means, someone asks you a question, and instead of saying, I assume, or okay, that's fine, they just say, I reckon so, or I reckon. And the last word is a word that almost everybody knows. It's just, this word right here really gets people, because people will argue you down about how this is pronounced. And this is what we call them up here. And it is a pecan. I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. Down in South Georgia, where my daddy's from, they call it a pecan too. So, but people up in the mountains, almost everybody calls it a pecan too. But I remember, like, when I lived in different parts of the country and traveled to different areas and met, like a bunch of different people, that was one word that people would argue with the most. And I thought that's just always what it was called. I thought it was not pronounced any other way, but there's people that call it pecan and pecan. And pecan, just that word, just saying it that way drives me crazy, to be honest with you. I can't stand it. It makes my ears bleed. I don't know. It's just something about, I guess it just sounds so like proper, and the area that I come from is so just not proper. I don't know. So it does not sound right to me at all. It sounds like somebody's trying to make it seem all fancy, and to me it's just an old pecan that falls off a tree. But I'm sure you all will argue over this. If you bring this word up to other people, I'm sure you will always find someone that pronounces it differently than you. I mean, that's one thing. Like, when I lived away and met a bunch of people, this is one word we would talk about, and everybody almost pronounced it like a completely different way. But especially me, when I was in the Midwest, I was the only one that pronounced it pecan, and they used to make fun of me and tease me about that so bad. But that's my favorite one. That's my favorite word that we use, because so many people, everybody knows it, and everybody pronounces it differently. And it's just cool to hear everyone's perspective on how they pronounce things, and just listening to where they come from. I love listening to accents. I love languages. I love to learn completely different languages. I know a lot of Arabic, and I know a lot of Gaelic, which is the Irish language. I've been studying this stuff for years, and I'm going to do a video on me speaking Irish at some point, just because that's like one of my greatest loves in life is anything to do with Ireland. It's my dream place to visit. It's where all my ancestors have come from. I know the towns they came from, and it's a beautiful place from the pictures and videos that I've seen online, and it's a place I hold very near and dear to my heart. And so I wanted to learn the language. I want to learn to have the accent to be able to do that, and I want to just learn everything I can about the culture and the people before I go there. So guys, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but kind of hesitated just because it was different than what I usually do. But you're not gonna know until you take risk, and that's the whole point of life. If you don't take risk, you're not living. So I decided to do it, and I really hope y'all like this. Leave comments below, what you think, if you want to hear more videos like this, and I'll look through them and I'll see what I can do for you. All right, guys, thank y'all so much. Y'all have a good week, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.